One moment. All right. So we're going to go ahead and start. So this is the Transition to Adulthood presentation. This is part of our Transition and Adult Training Series. It's presented by the Daniel Jordan Fiddle Foundation, Transition and Adult Programs at UM-NSU CARD. My name is Natalie Roman, and I am a case manager on this team. I also bring two different perspectives. So I am a professional in this community. I was trained as a behavior therapist and now work as a case manager, but I'm also a sister of an adult with autism. So I personally went through his transition from high school, and now he is 26. So I've seen both sides. So that's just a little bit about me. Again, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat because we have a lot of information to go through. Most likely, we'll just have time for questions in the chat. But if you have any questions concerning in Broward County, I have my supervisor, Sylvia Gill, who will be answering those questions. And then for anything Miami-Dade and Monroe, I have Jennifer Feinstein as well. So we know with the audience, we have a couple of professionals and parents and caregivers where we have some of the students in school, some are currently in the deferred age or have already exited the school system. Before we start, I do want to share that, of course, each individual and family's plan is going to be different, going to be presenting a lot of different options. It's really for you to have the information. So we're going to go ahead and start. So these are the areas that we're going to focus on. So really the beginning, the transition services and programs. So these are going to be different from county to county between Miami-Dade, Monroe, and Broward. And also if you're in public and private school, we're going to give some general information. Then we're going to move on to the paths. So now that we're out of high school and you've officially exited, and you finished a transition program, what paths are available to me? Also the funding sources as well. So we have two big ones where we have the Agency for Persons with Disabilities and the Medicaid Waiver. And then, so Social Security Administration has two different programs. And then we'll wrap up with some legal support options. So now we're gonna start our journey with the transition services and programs. So for a lot of families that I assist through CARD in the community, sometimes this information is not readily available to them. So really want to make sure that we are spreading the news that there is a process in the public school system for transition services. Now, transition services has many components and they're listed here. So we want to concern ourselves with things about self-determination because these students will eventually exit and become adults and they need to be able to self-advocate. And if they have their own goals or things that they want to do, they need to be able to make decisions. And sometimes we have to start presenting options to them in order for them to learn that skill. So even though it's transition services that are part of the school, we also have to start doing these things at home as well. We have to also look at if we're continuing education. Now, taking in consideration that students' interest, we're looking at any job skills training, job placement. We can think about maybe some vocational training, whether they go to a technical college or get some on-the-job training programs, job shadowing, sampling. There's also integrated employment to give them that experience. There's a lot of agencies that can help you with this process. We'll name a couple. We also have to think about after. So we definitely have the focus maybe of employment or school, but what about living? Things like handling money, if they're able to travel, independent community functioning. We also have to think about recreation and leisure. I always tell my adults, if you work hard, you should also play hard. You need to enjoy yourself. Also to all professionals and parents out there as well. If we're putting in the work and we're really trying, we should also enjoy ourselves. That's where that community participation is really important. This is a flow chart that I really like when we're looking at IEP meetings. And it's really important to make sure that your student is involved in this process, whether you're a professional or a parent, is really getting their input. Now, on the personal side, with my brother, this was a little bit difficult because an IEP meeting can be very daunting, but it was picking the right moment for him to come in. It was prepping him before he came into the meeting, having some visuals so that he could have some reference to what we were talking about. And it was really to get his input on what next steps and what his interests were as well. So there's a couple of assessments that the school can do too, to really identify the strengths and abilities of this person, because that's what we want to take into consideration. Also their motivation, their interest really tells us where they could be more successful in. I know because I love my job, I love to wake up early and be at my job and do the hard work that I need to. It would be a little bit difficult if I didn't like my job. So we really want to take their interest in consideration. So looking also at those post-secondary goals, and we've talked about maybe a course of study, transition services could be part of the plan. We want to maybe bring in some agencies like Vocational Rehabilitation that we'll talk about, and then really just going over the goals. So a big part of the transition services that a lot of my families unfortunately don't know about is the deferral of the receipt of the standard diploma. So really deferment and how that process should start. So I always say that a parent or a caregiver, because that was my role as a caregiver, is the best advocate for your student, for your loved one. But in order to be the best advocate, you have to be very informed. And in order to be informed, we have to do some homework. But where do we start? Sometimes this information is not readily given to us, so we might have to do some research. So here I do have the information for both transition teams for Broward and Miami-Dade, the list of the supervisors as well. You know, there's websites, phone numbers, make sure you call, email, really making sure that that person knows who you are and that you know what's available, because each county has a list of different programs that really take some steps in order to enter. Now I have some tips here at the bottom, excuse me, that it's really important for not only the parent, but also the student or the caregiver to look at what are the options. Let's just see, you know, we have the option of either graduating if we have fulfilled everything, part of our graduation requirements. If we have the IEP, we're able to defer, and what program. So just speaking about Broward, it could be the difference between going into a PASS class, going into Access, going to career placement, or even in Miami-Dade, Project Bridge, Project Victory. So really looking at those descriptions, seeing who runs those programs, maybe reaching out to them, giving calls. I know this process is a little bit different right now because of COVID, but we really want to make connections with who is running the program. So just looking at options is always the first step. Then also speak with your students' teachers. They're really gonna know how your student is in that educational setting. So they might be able to also add input into what program might be better for them. Where can they be most successful in? Then we wanna make sure, again, we're involving the student, showing the options. So some of the job training or possible internship programs are in different settings. So sometimes a hospital setting in Broward, or a hotel setting, or something that's outside or inside. So we really wanna make sure we're taking their interest to get their motivation, because for some of our students, they've had a hard time in school. So for a lot of them, they think, oh no, I'm gonna be stuck in school. I don't wanna do that. But it's really letting them know this is different, where the focus used to be academics. We still have a little bit of focus in transition programs, but it's more about employment and really adding the skill, the life skills, the social skills, more hands-on practice compared to maybe some less time in the classroom. And then finally, once you have all those steps and you've involved the student and you've done that homework, it's really going to the IEP team with an actual plan, saying, you know, I've touched base with, and I'm gonna name someone in Broward, through the Access programs or through career placement. I've spoken with, you know, the lead teacher, the lead facilitator. We've talked about my loved one in particular, about their abilities and their challenges, and we really think that this is a good fit. So we want to take the time to do that. Now, we mentioned vocational rehabilitation. So VR for short can come in while you're still in high school. So they do have what's called a transition youth program. So for some of my families that may have a loved one in private school, this could be an option for you as well. So it can be from on-the-job training to working on those self-advocacy skills. We're going back to that transition first slide where I had the list of all these different skills that we need to practice. So through VR, this referral can happen through the IEP team, or families themselves can reach out. I've always tried to be the most proactive person. So for me, I can control my behavior, so I go ahead and make that connection. So I do advise you to try to make that connection. If anything, the IEP team is also making it as well. And just some, in general, Florida resources. So Project 10 is a great resource if you haven't heard of them. A wonderful website with so many roadmaps and visuals really explaining this process. So I am going to email this presentation. So anytime you see something that's underlined, that's a link, you can click on it. They have updated their secondary transition roadmap for families. So this really goes step by step about this process, really understanding the diploma track that your student is on, really understanding deferment and what are your options after high school. So definitely take a look at this resource. And then also just in general in South Florida, we have referred a lot to FND. There's also lots of self-advocates out there as well, but it's really making sure that if you need help in understanding this process or the school is giving you some challenges, is to get a self-advocate, get informed, get trained, get the information. So for Broward, just one of those programs is FND, Family Network on Disabilities, and then also in Miami-Dade is Parent to Parent. So it's really about getting educated about this process, knowing what your options are, and making sure that you have that as an option, because so many of our families then come to us here at CARD and then they've already exited the school system and we're too late at that point. So we want to make sure you get all the information you need to make these decisions. I know it was a really quick overview of transition, but really the message is to do your homework, to get informed. All schools have transition teams. Some schools even have a transition specialist that is assigned to them. Really making sure you know who that person is, and if you don't, you can reach out to CARD. I'll give the information at the end. Give us a call and we can provide you that information. You want to make sure that you have all the knowledge so that you can make informed decisions. So now when a family, let's say, was in high school, has deferred, they've completed the deferment process, student is now 21 and has exited, what does it look like for that student? So what are the paths? So one of the most important things, which was really hard even me to really realize, is that there's a huge shift between entitlement and eligibility. So entitlement, we have all these things that really protect us, that for students with a disability, they are entitled to certain services on their IEP because of FAPE, because of all of these acts and laws that have passed. But once you exit the school system, that entitlement changes to eligibility, meaning just because you have a diagnosis doesn't mean you automatically get that benefit, you automatically get that service. So the biggest thing here that I've learned is paperwork. Any documents that you have. Any documents that you have to save. I have about 6 to 7 binders full of my brother's past evaluations, IEPs. Entities can purge documents after 7 years. So definitely, if you don't have all the copies of your IEPs, call the school and request those. Any notes from, if you're getting any therapy services, if your loved one's seeing a psychologist, psychiatrist, try to keep everything you can the most organized. I always say keeping it paper, but also digitally, because you don't know whatever, something could happen to paper. So it's really making sure you have all this, because in eligibility, you have to show why this person needs this service. And we want to be realistic. So we want to match the student to the setting. So this is not just about school or employment, it's everything, all the options in these different paths. And I know sometimes this is a harder reality, being realistic and really listening to your loved one. And I know we've been referring them to student, but really listening to them, getting their input. And you can get input from anyone, whether you need to add visuals or have them use their an AAC device or written text. You really can involve them in this process. So it's a collaborative effort of trying to identify, the skills and challenges. All of us have skills and challenges. I was really horrible at math, so I definitely wasn't a mathematician. I went into the field all the skills that I was really good at. And that's the same thing for all of our students. We want to make sure we're taking into account their motivation and interest. I've said this multiple times already. The more that they are interested in, we can see more of that motivation. Won't be 100%, but we can see that they can try a little bit more. Also, choosing attainable goals. We don't ask for a goldfish to climb a tree. It's not going to happen. So we really want to make sure that anything that we're setting up can be attainable. We want to put a little bit of a challenge, but not too much, because what happens then is the motivation can decrease if I'm not accessing the result or I'm not able to do it. I'm just going to give up. So we want to make sure that we're making a plan that's realistic. Part of this is also researching programs, schools, and really seeing what does that program offer, what does that school offer, and does it best fit my student, my loved one. And sometimes schools and programs don't offer it, and that's okay, but we then have to supplement it. So for schools, it could be having an outside tutor, making sure they have a psychologist, psychiatrist. For a lot of our adults, sometimes they'll need a life coach or executive functioning coach to help them really organize and prioritize what they need to do. And continuing, speech, occupational, ABA therapy to make sure that, we're still progressing and we're still acquiring skills. So keeping in mind, we're matching the student to the setting. So one of the paths could be a college or university. Again, research. I know sometimes it's a lot of work and it's not the easiest to find. So that's why in this presentation, lots of things have links, and these links list a lot of these programs or school options. So on that link is the autism-friendly colleges. There's many of these options throughout the entire nation. And I love this list because it's very organized, it's structured in a chart. It tells you, what the colleges, where it is, what programs they have built in already, and then if they offer any additional programs. So that's where the research really goes in, because we have to understand if a college or university is part of your path, your family's path, we have to do the research first to understand what's required for admissions. Of course, many of these schools, you still have to hit the ACT or SAT score, the GPA, the number of hours. That's not going to change. That is a standard in order to enter that establishment. But also to understand, is there any additional programs for my loved one? So specifically for the Center for Autism, we're looking at autism programs, but many of these programs can benefit many individuals. So a lot of schools will have either a disability or accessibility services office, where students, if they disclose their diagnosis, could request, very important, request accommodations. So again, that's that entitled to eligible. So you can request, and I always tell my adults, if you request something, what does that mean? That means they could say yes, or they could say no. So again, you have to, weigh these options. Also, many schools for all students have either tutoring centers, writing or math labs, career services. So also looking already what's available at the college or university. I personally used a lot of these resources, especially the math lab, because I knew I struggled in that area. Now, some of these colleges and universities are going to have additional services, whether they offer, most of these services will then be offered as an additional fee on top of tuition, but it could be some great services that your loved one needs or your student academic mentoring or and peer tutoring, it would be academic tutoring or peer mentoring, either having coaching on life skills, social skills, helping with career planning, and then also on-campus living support. For a lot of my families that this is part of their path, I always ask, is your student at home already doing their laundry? Can they cook maybe simple meals? Are they keeping their room clean? And sometimes those answers are no. So I said, you really have to weigh your options, because is your student able to learn how to do all that stuff before they enter this setting? We always want to make sure that we are choosing or setting up our student for success. Sometimes does that mean I need to go to a local college or university maybe the first 2 years so I can live at home and work on those skills, and then maybe I can transfer later. But we have to weigh these options. Now, just like for everyone in the general public, sometimes college or university is not part of our plan, and that's okay. There are many other options. So there's vocational, technical, trade schools that also offer certificate programs. And sometimes this could be the better option. Right now, we have lots of individuals with bachelors, with masters that are struggling to get employment. This could be a better road for your student. If the end goal is employment, this could be a faster route. So some advantages to these types of programs is that it focuses on a specific skill, and I don't have to repeat all these general ed courses, having to take science again and history and math. Just depending on the track that I choose, it's a more focus. It's most likely a shorter program compared to a 4-year minimum bachelor's. It could be up to 12 months, 15 months, depending on the program. Some of our students love working and really learning hands-on. So some of these programs may be a great fit for them. It could save you money, it can save you time. Also, some of these classes are much smaller, maybe compared to a university or a college. And sometimes we see it's easier to get placed in employment for these jobs. And just a resource for everyone to have for Broward County, we're talking about Atlantic Technical, McFadder, and Sheridan. And then in Miami-Dade, there's some technical colleges, and this link will show you all different options throughout the county. So another road could be directly into employment, but employment has all these different types. So we're very used to the competitive employment where everybody is competing for that job. We're all going to interviews, we're all setting up our resumes, and that could be an option for our student, but we also have to know what else is available. Again, doing the homework, putting in the work to find out what's there. So we also have supported employment, where I have a lot of my adults at CARD, where they're getting ongoing support. They may be working with a job coach. Maybe they worked with Vocational Rehabilitation to get this placement. And it's really about making sure they have the right support to be successful in that setting. There's also customized, where also can be called job carving, where maybe a job position, let's say it was a receptionist that has 15 tasks that they do, maybe that job worked with a company, and the job coach came in and they said, okay, 5 of these tasks, we're gonna take them out, and that's gonna be its own position. And that could be more tasks that are repetitive or very structured. So it could be scanning, maybe being sorting the mail, making copies. So there's also those types of jobs. Segregated or enclave are most commonly seen in adult day programs that we'll talk about, which gives those adults an opportunity to have some work experience. They are paid mostly on what they make or what they package. And then we also have self-employment. So everyone kind of has that self-employment option, being an entrepreneur. So we're going to talk about one company that is helping our community make that happen. And also through vocational rehabilitation, if they feel after all of the assessments that they conducted, that is an option for you and your family, they can help you with that process. So again, VR, we're going to mention them a lot. So they do have those transition youth services, but also in employment. So I always, whenever I have a family that exits the school system, VR is always our first stop on the road. I know with VR, I always say it's a very large organization. They're serving lots of people, not just people diagnosed with autism. And sometimes they might not have the full knowledge of the needs of our individuals. So again, let's do our homework. So part of VR is knowing what they do and what they don't do. So your guide to employment handbook services is underlined here. It's a link. Please make sure you read that, you take a look at it, because it actually breaks down, just like a road, the process from start to finish. From the start, when you sign up and you do the application or the referral form, all the way to the end. So really understanding is there's things like financial participation, there is an order of selection. So a lot of these things sometimes are not shared with families. So if you don't know what's going to happen and it's a surprise to you, that's where I see my families getting upset, and I would get upset too. But if I know the expectations and the road that we're traveling, then when these things come up, I'll be more familiar. You're still entitled to get upset if need be, but you need to know what's going on, because VR can offer a lot of great services. They can help really with the job placement, the vendors for job coaches. They can even potentially pay for a portion of tuition, as long as that's deemed through the assessments. So this can be a really helpful agency. It's really understanding when you go to VR, you should have a plan. Just like at the IEP team, you did your homework, you need to do your homework also with VR. So some employment programs, some of these are to South Florida, some are in Broward, but here is just a starting point for everyone. So Ken's crew actually came from New York City, and they're currently working in South Florida for jobs with Home Depot. So a great thing that they do is not only help with job placement and job coaches, they have some training too. They understand a lot of our community. Not only do they need the job placement, but maybe navigating the employment environment, social skills, executive functioning. So also offering classes. Goodwill South Florida also offers some on-the-job training and some employment opportunities, also Best Buddy Jobs. And Picasso Einstein, this is the company that really has focused on self-employment training. So if you and your student, your loved one, really see that as an option for you and your family, I definitely recommend for you to take a look at the website and call them. Do some homework, do some research, and see, can this be an option for us? Now, again, everyone's path after high school may be different. Also, for a lot of my adults I always say, we need to start somewhere, right? We need to figure out what you're interested in, where your strengths are, and sometimes we can't do that without trying. So volunteering is always a great way to try. So really, we're learning new skills. We get to meet people, maybe practice some of our social skills, depending on what we do, maybe the interest in different work fields, and it's also gaining experience. I always tell parents, how did you get your first job? Sometimes they'll say I had a connection, like I networked, or I worked for my parent, or I volunteered. So really also taking a step back and thinking how your process was when you started your job search and relating that to your student or loved one. I always told my brother, I started volunteering, I started babysitting, and that's how I also learned what it took to do a job and how to be professional and make sure that I'm on time and that I'm accepting feedback. And this is a great way to just kind of open that door. So in Broward, there's a website called Hands on Broward. You can create a profile and you can put, I like jogs, I like outside. You can really put your preferences, and it will only send you those volunteer opportunities. So once something is available in the county, they'll send it to you, and then it's up to you to say, okay, yes, I'll do that, and then you can sign up and do the next steps. Volunteer Match is also a great website that you can use throughout South Florida as well. So that way it takes a little bit of the work of having to really do a lot of research. Let the websites do that for you. And then for some of our adults, an adult day program might be the best fit for them. So there's programs and training, but most of these programs operate from a Monday to Friday basis, sometimes between 5 to 6 hours per day. So some programs may start at 8, end at 2, or start at 9 and end at 3. So these programs are really to allow that adult to have those opportunities to socialize, maybe some recreation. Some of these programs have some training components to them, so they're teaching vocational skills and getting involved in the community. It allows that adult to have some structure and routine. So if we're looking at the other side, it could be that this adult could just be at home, which is okay, but it's also about always challenging the adult, having them be involved, and always learning. And we can learn in all different ways. So every program will differ in some cost or what payment methods they receive. The Medicaid waiver can really help in this area. This is one of the services they pay for. It's also to keep in mind the ratio. So some adult day programs might have one facilitator or teacher per 10 adults, where some other programs might have one teacher or facilitator to 3 adults. So it really is taking a look at your loved one and saying, you know, what do they need to be successful, and really seeing those programs. If adult day programs is something that you need help locating, or maybe some options, definitely reach out to CARD and we can do that as a technical assistance and give you a list of referrals. Now, recreation and leisure. And sometimes we forget about this. But again, if we work hard, we should be able to play hard too. So I know for me, especially my home is my office, I have to take the time to stop and do some hobbies, to walk outside, to exercise, to do this stuff so that I can stay sane in this different world. So the same thing with our loved ones. Let's find options for them, programs. A lot of these organizations or programs are now virtual, so it's great. So this is just a list for you to start, but Special Olympics Florida is a wonderful organization. Right now they're not participating. Some sports are participating in person, but a majority are still just virtual programs, but they offer something weekly. Just to name a couple, the Friendship Journey, Friendship Circle has done a great job of moving everything virtually. We have 2 Jewish community programs in here that really still offer these services. JAFCO, Social Cog, We Coach Foundation. So this is really a list for you to start. But again, do this with your loved one. Show them the schedule. Show that, you know, some are art activities, exercising, singing, dancing, and have their input on what they would like to do. So now funding resources. So we talked about all these different programs, but how do we pay for these programs? So part of it that I mentioned before could be through vocational rehabilitation. That tends to be a really good resource. But for some of our loved ones, they may qualify for Social Security Administration programs. So through the SSA, there's 2 programs. So we have the Social Security Disability Insurance, also known as SSDI. And then we have Supplemental Security Income, which is SSI. Of everything that's confused in our community, I think these 2 programs are the most confusing. So we're here to kind of clear it up. So for SSDI, it's really about once the individual is an adult. There's 2 ways that they can get this. Either one of their parents has retired and that parent has enough credits in order for them to get the benefit from the Social Security Administration. That parent can choose to keep that benefit, or they can assign that benefit to their loved one. So that means that their loved one could get a check from Social Security Administration as an SSDI, or the adult themselves have worked enough credits and they qualify on their own behalf. But really, SSDI is only happening when the individual is an adult. Now, SSDI has 2 different components. So you can have SSI as a child and as an adult. As a child, they look at your parents' income. So really that is the determining factor. You have to fall within a certain income range, and if you do, you are able, and you have a documented disability that's listed through the SSA, you are able to get that benefit. Now, when that child turns 18, the Social Security Administration will now do what's called a redetermination process. For them, they want to make sure that this person still has the documented diagnosis based on their definition of a disability. Now, their definition of a disability, for me personally, does not match mine. And I think for a lot of the community also does not match. But that is what they use, and that's the definition that they go for. So I have seen some of our children that have had SSI go through redetermination and get determined that either they are not disabled or they just do not qualify to get the benefit anymore. This happened to my brother. When he turned 18, we went through this process and he no longer receives this benefit. It happens to a lot of my families if your loved one may have the ability to work. Now, when that happened, I was very upset, but in the end, he did work with a lot of support. But again, you need to be prepared for that. Now, an adult on their own, once they're 18, can apply and can qualify. But what it's going to depend on is a specific definition. Now, I've seen some families get it where others don't. It really depends who you get on the docket, unfortunately. But the purpose is to help an individual that may not have the ability to work. If you do have the ability or the capacity to work, then in most cases we see that that individual or family does not get that benefit. There is a checklist online. So again, all of this is hyperlinked and will be sent to you to get specific information. I've had some families where it seems like they didn't get it. They went through the process and they were able to. So I say, if you can try. But what's really important is the documentation. So again, having those binders, having all that information, making sure you have a lot of information before they turn 18, keeping all those IEPs, therapy reports, doctor's letters. And right now, because of COVID, they're really encouraging for families to call the main line to initiate the process. You can start the process online, but there seems to be a disconnect, and we don't want you to get lost within the shuffle of all the applications. So I always say it's better safe than sorry to reach out directly to them. Now, another source can be through the Agency for Persons with Disabilities, or also known as APD. So really what they offer is the Medicaid waiver. Now, they have a specific eligibility. So again, eligibility, that word. We're not entitled to the Medicaid waiver. We have to be eligible. And I bolded their definition. And it's pretty much prior to the age of 18, constitutes a substantial handicap that reasonably can be expected to continue indefinitely. Now, that could be vague or specific, but these are all the disabilities that are included. For some families where we kind of see on the borderline, I would say, go ahead and try, call, make sure they know who you are, and you can kind of go through that process. But again, it's very important with APD that you have documentation of the diagnosis before 18 years old. You do have to be a resident of Florida in order to apply within the state. I've had some families where they've recently moved and the amount that they got maybe in a northeastern state compared to South Florida is very different. So it's also just keeping in mind, if you're not going to stay in Florida, you're going to move, you have to do the research, see what agency distributes or pretty much takes care of the Medicaid waiver, and understanding how that could change if you have to, who do you have to call when things, if you have moved, to make sure everything's up to date. Now for this is really, everything is a packet. You putting all documentation, application. I always say, once you submit something, call, confirm that it was received, do some check calls. Again, it's really making sure that they know who you are and that you're just updated on the process. So the waiver has been known to be a couple of years. Some families can qualify for what's called crisis. So there's certain situations where you could be moved up in order to address a situation that's happening. So that could be if the individual is homeless, if the caregiver is no longer able to take care of their loved one, or that loved one is, not is in threat of others or themselves. So they do have some crisis options where it could help you in the moment, but the waiver really, we see it as the long term. So things like group homes, adult day programs, respite care, additional therapies as an adult could be obtained and paid through the Medicaid waiver. So here's a list of all the different services. So again, they even do supported employment. We talked about adult day training, some of the therapies, even had supporting living coaches. So again, there could be a lot, but it is a process and it could take some time. Here at CARD, we definitely inform, when we service the whole lifespan. So families with little ones, we definitely tell them as soon as you're, in the 3 to 5 range, apply, because you don't know what type of support you're going to need as an adult. We mentioned some housing. So group home is a type of housing. So it's really just trying to think now, what's going to be the next option? Is this person going to live with me or family members? Can they live on their own? Can they learn to live on their own? Maybe with roommates, maybe supportive housing community could be an option. Sometimes due to funds, maybe Section 8 housing, group homes, assisted living facilities. So there's all different types, but just keep in mind that most of these are either private pay or through Medicaid, the Medicaid waiver option. So not through Medicaid insurance, through the waiver. So I always tell families we need to prepare for this because one day we're not going to be here, so we need to have some sort of plan. And just to share some of those housing community options, so in North Florida, just for your information, there's a place called Noah's Ark, that's in Lakeland, Florida, and then the Nancy Direct Residences is in Venice, and Venice is around Tampa, Florida, but here in South Florida, in Broward County, by Cooper City, there's the Foundation for Independent Living, and most recently, Casa Familia has broken ground in the Kendall area. And if a housing community is something you're really looking at or really want to plan for, they do have a survey if you want to get more information. So again, this is hyperlinked. So when I send this out, that's something you're interested in, please make sure that you fill that out. So just keep in mind again that housing communities can be a great option because you might have some built-in supports there, but always keeping in mind the cost as well. Now we're going to keep moving on and we're going to go to legal support options. So again, lots of different options. So in the state of Florida, the age of majority is 18. For a couple of other states, it's 19 or 21. But at 18, once your loved one turns 18, that person is deemed their own legal guardian, meaning they can make their own decisions, they can sign their own documents. So this has happened to some families where it's presented at school where you can sign yourself out at 18 or decide not to go to school anymore, and it's happened. So for some of our loved ones, we want to think about the least restrictive. So we want to really, again, weigh those options. What are the abilities of my loved one? What are the challenges? Because we don't want to interfere as much with their independence, but we want to make sure that they are safe. We want to make sure that they stay healthy. We want to make sure that they're protected from any exploitation. So there's a couple of legal options that you can consider. So this is a visual that you'll have. We here at CARD love visuals, but really starting at the top is the most restrictive, meaning that the parent or the guardian really has pretty much a majority of their rights. They're the ones making all the decisions. Where we go all the way to the bottom, the point of the triangle, that the person is making their own decisions. So we have a lot of these things in between. We'll just take a look at. What's most commonly known are these two types, either full plenary guardianship, where it involves the court, you need an attorney, and the court has to deem that person incapacitated, meaning that they are not able to make their own decisions. Now, some families have gone through this process and it might best fit their adult, but we want to just keep in mind, what does that mean? Most of the time, a plenary guardianship cannot be reversed. It takes a lot of time, effort, money in order to reverse this. You want to make sure if that's the decision you're making for your family, that it's the correct one. A step down is a guardian advocate. This can be reversed over time a little bit more easily. It doesn't require the process by going to court. It's really just filing paperwork with the court, but it's really that this person is going to be assigned my guardian, but they have specific rights that they can either practice in or that they can help me. So this is not as restrictive, and we see a lot of our individuals that maybe are in some post-secondary options might benefit from maybe a guardian advocate compared to full guardianship. Again, always any legal advice you take from an attorney, we're just talking about it in general. The visual on this next page is the alternatives to guardianship. So full guardianship and guardian advocacy are what's most well known in our community, but there's other options. So supported decision-making is actually a process that has been passed in other states that is pending right now in Florida, but really it's about creating a plan for your individual on who they can seek to make decisions. So it's really more about the individual. If they have the capacity to maybe ask for help and be collaborative with their decision-making, that could be something for them. A representative payee is really talking about if the individual receives Social Security or any of the Social Security Administration programs. It's just that you could be the person that the check is addressed to, but being the representative payee does not mean that you are the legal guardian or you can make other decisions or sign on behalf of that person. Power of attorney. We do have a lot of our adults that maybe are more independent that have this as an option where families can decide to do a durable power of attorney so that if they need any help with finances or anything in the medical area, they can step in. Also talking about trust and savings accounts to have that protection and have those funds set for them. And really person-centered planning, which is almost part of the supported decision-making. It's really understanding what does this person want? We want them involved in this process, which I think this should always be considered regardless of which option you chose. Even if the person cannot verbally give the decision or make the decision, it's about making sure that it's accessible if they're using an augmentative device, if they need visuals or pictures in order to help make decisions. So it's just a brief overview, but I'm going to give you some resources so you can get more information. So Turning 18 is a great website if right now you and your loved one or your family are struggling between full guardianship, guardian advocacy. This is a questionnaire that's going to ask you about your loved one and your family, and it will kind of walk you through that process that you need to do to make that sort of decision. So it doesn't have to be an end-all be-all, but it does help walk you through these legal options. Also, the Disability Independence Group, Disability Rights Florida, has a lot of information about these different processes. Supported decision-making is something that is coming to Florida, hasn't passed yet, but if that's something maybe you're interested in, which is the most least restrictive of these, compared to just letting the person make their own decisions, iDecide is a really good website. And if you're looking for attorneys to do any of these processes, you can research on the Florida Bar referral site, or you can reach out to CARD and we can give you some referrals. Now, also, CARD is a great resource, so that can be part of the agency team. I'll talk a little bit about CARD at the end, but also now that 211 Broward online or over the phone can also help with referrals, typically for Broward County, and then Miami-Dade. Also was 211 to Jewish Community Services of South Florida, or used to be Switchboard Miami, where again, you can also research and find either referrals or programs as well. So just briefly to talk about UM-NSU CARD. So this is the organization that I work for. So we are really created to build on the capacity of the state and local resources, not to duplicate or replace them. So with CARD, we really say we're not a direct service, but we're really here to help guide and support you. So we do give that individualized client and family support. So you'll get a specific case manager, and that person will help with your family kind of have these conversations, see what paths are available to you. We offer trainings, lots of community programs, and really our mission is to optimize the potential with people with autism or autistic adults. It's really about, let's see where you are right now, and let's, how can we get to your goals, and sort of the next steps. Now, who's eligible for CARD? So we are the Center for Autism and Related Disabilities, so we have autism spectrum disorder as the diagnosis, but any previous diagnoses, so pervasive developmental disorder, autistic, Asperger's syndrome, and then we also have your related disabilities as Fragile X, Rett syndrome, Angelman, and everything that's listed here. So if your loved one or if you're a professional and you meet a family that has one of these documented diagnoses, definitely register them or refer them to CARD so that we can really be that support and guidance for them. Now, if you find yourself not with one of these document diagnoses, you can still reach out to CARD, and what we do is called technical assistance. So this is where this information is. So if you're in Miami-Dade or Broward, if you're in Miami-Dade or Monroe, you can call this 305 number here, and if there was any specific resources in this presentation that maybe you needed a referral list for example, an adult day program, you can call this number and then they will connect you with a case manager to give you that referral. Same thing with Broward. And because we're going to be putting this online, for the state of Florida, there is one CARD center for every kind of group of counties. So all of Florida is covered. So for any reason, if you do find yourself with one of the eligible diagnoses or need some technical or referrals for assistance, you can call this 1-800 number as well. We have our website, and if you want to kind of start with your process, you could always pre-register online, and in that way, we will call you instead of you calling us, so that you can fill that out. That's a link there. Also, because technology is our new world now, if you take your phone and take a picture of this QR code, it's going to bring it right up for you. So it's always also been helpful for a lot of professionals, especially any schools when you're getting new families, to have this information readily available. And then I want to thank everyone. I have a little bit of time, so I'll open up some questions, but in order to continue to offer these CARD services and making sure that our services stay free and we're here for the community, you can just take a moment, take out your phone, and scan this lovely QR code for you to fill out an evaluation survey link. So I'll give 1 second if you want to go ahead and do that. We'll try to put that link in the questionnaire box, but I'm going to stop sharing and then I'm going to stop the recording so nobody's faces are on here.